The Sweet Siren. A Mermaid's Story. Chapter 1. The Black Sheep's Secret. Deep beneath the sapphire waves, where coral spires stretched toward the distant surface light, Princess Coral pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the royal palace's forgotten tower. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she listened for the telltale swish of her sister's tails in the corridor beyond. When only silence greeted her, she slipped through a crack in the ancient coral and into her most precious secret, a hidden grotto that would horrify her family if they ever discovered it. Unlike the pristine chambers of her 5 sisters, adorned with lustrous pearls and delicate sea flowers arranged in perfect symmetry, Coral's secret room resembled something from the human world above. Shelves carved from shipwrecked timber lined the curved walls, each one meticulously arranged with her forbidden treasures. Crystallized sugar lumps that sparkled like captured starlight, waterlogged honey cakes still wrapped in their oiled cloth cocoons, and mysterious rectangular objects encased in crinkled silver foil that she'd learned from overheard merchant conversations were called chocolate bars. The grotto itself was a marvel of secrecy and devotion. Coral had spent 3 years hollowing it out, grain by grain, carrying away sand and debris in her collection pouches so no one would notice the accumulation. She'd woven curtains from the finest sea silk to protect her treasures from the salt water's corrosive touch, and installed a complex system of mirrors salvaged from sunken ships to reflect and amplify what little light filtered down from the surface. The effect was magical. Her collection seemed to glow with an otherworldly radiance, like fallen stars arranged in neat, obsessive rows. The centerpiece of her collection was a magnificent glass display case, rescued from what appeared to have been a confectioner's shop. Inside, she'd arranged her most prized possessions. A tin of French bonbons, with delicate sugar flowers still somehow intact. A handful of striped peppermint humbugs that had somehow survived their underwater journey, and her crown jewel, a single piece of what human traders called saltwater taffy that had retained its cheerful pink and white swirls. She'd never dared to taste this one, saving it like a sacred relic of the world she longed to join. Coral's webbed fingers traced lovingly over a glass jar filled with colorful spheres she'd retrieved from a sunken merchant vessel just last week. The humans called them hard candies, and though the seawater had dulled their vibrant hues from jewel-bright to soft pastels, she could still imagine how they must have gleamed in the sunlight above. She'd risked everything to salvage them during the last trading expedition, hiding among the cargo, then slipping away from the royal procession, while her father, King Neptune, conducted his monthly diplomatic business with the surface dwellers of Dulasher. That had been a particularly dangerous mission. The official trade meetings were sacred to her father. A delicate balance of underwater diplomacy, where mermaid-crafted pearls, rare deep-sea minerals, and enchanted kelp were exchanged for human goods like tools, medicines, and exotic spices. Coral was strictly forbidden from these gatherings, not because she was too young, but because her obsession with human confections was considered a royal embarrassment. Her sisters attended as dignified representatives of the realm, while Coral was hidden away like a shameful secret. "Coral, where are you hiding now?" Her eldest sister Pearl's voice echoed through the water, sharp with familiar disapproval. "Father wants to see you in the throne room immediately. The Dulasher delegation is here for the monthly trade council, and he specifically requested that all his daughters be present for the formal introductions." Coral's stomach dropped like an anchor. A formal introduction meant they intended to parade her before the human diplomats like some curiosity. The last time this had happened, she'd embarrassed herself by asking the trade minister detailed questions about sugar crystallization techniques instead of offering polite royal pleasantries. Her father had been mortified, her sisters scandalized, and Coral had been forbidden from all subsequent diplomatic functions. She quickly sealed the grotto entrance behind a curtain of swaying kelp and swam toward the palace's grand hall, her mind racing with excuses. As the youngest princess of the undersea realm, she was already considered an embarrassment to the royal family, their greatest disappointment in a lineage of accomplished daughters. Her sisters were diplomats, warriors, and scholars. Coral was simply the one who collected human refuse and dreamed of impossible things. But as she glided through the palace corridors, passing portraits of stern-faced ancestors who had ruled the seas with dignity and never once craved the taste of caramelized sugar, Coral clutched the small piece of waterlogged toffee hidden in her palm. She'd been saving it for a special occasion, and perhaps facing another round of royal humiliation qualified. The sweet had lost most of its original texture, but she could still detect hints of butter and brown sugar that made her imagination soar. Her route to the throne room took her past the official treasure vaults, where legitimate trade goods were stored with proper ceremony and royal approval. Through the coral archways, she could see mountains of perfectly sorted pearls, each one graded and catalogued for diplomatic exchange. How different her chaotic, secret collection seemed in comparison, an amateur's passion versus a kingdom's precision. As she approached the grand throne room, Coral could hear the formal cadences of diplomatic conversation echoing through the water. Her father's deep voice mixed with unfamiliar human accents, discussing trade quotas and shipping schedules with the businesslike efficiency that made their kingdoms such successful partners. Soon, she would have to swim into that formal space, curtsy appropriately, and pretend to be a proper princess, while her heart yearned for nothing more than to ask these surface dwellers who could breathe underwater as a result of King Neptune's power about their legendary kingdom of confectioners. No matter what punishment or embarrassment awaited her, no matter how much her family wished she were different, Coral couldn't stop dreaming of the sweet world that existed just beyond the waves. And perhaps, if she was very careful and very lucky, today she might finally learn something new about the magical art of human confectionery. Chapter 2. The Kingdom of Sweets. The throne room of the underwater palace was a masterpiece of aquatic architecture, with living coral formations that pulsed with bioluminescent light and columns carved from single massive pearls. At its center sat King Neptune on his throne of twisted gold, his imposing figure commanding respect from both merfolk and the collection of human diplomats who floated in their magical breathing apparatus. Coral slipped in through a side entrance, hoping to avoid attention, but her father's stern gaze found her immediately. "Ah, Princess Coral!" King Neptune's voice boomed through the water, tinged with barely concealed resignation. "Allow me to present my youngest daughter to our esteemed guests from the kingdom of Dulasher." Coral curtsied as gracefully as she could manage, her tail creating elegant curves in the water. But her eyes were immediately drawn to the human delegation. These weren't the usual stern-faced trade officials she'd glimpsed from afar. These diplomats wore clothing adorned with intricate patterns that looked suspiciously like iced pastries, and their ceremonial accessories gleamed with what appeared to be crystallized sugar work. One woman's hat was decorated with what could only be spun sugar flowers, their delicate petals somehow maintaining their shape despite the underwater environment's magical protections. "Your Majesty," the lead diplomat bowed respectfully, his ornate vest catching the throne room's ethereal light. "I am Ambassador Honeycomb of Dulasher, and may I say what an honor it is to strengthen the bonds between our realms. Our kingdom has prospered greatly from this alliance, particularly given your realm's provision of the rare deep-sea salts that enhance our confectionery arts." Coral's heart skipped a beat. Deep-sea salts for confectionery? She'd had no idea that her father's trade agreements specifically supported the human sweet-making industry. Suddenly, the formal diplomatic exchanges took on an entirely new significance. These weren't just random trade goods being exchanged. Her father was actively participating in the creation of the very treasures she collected from shipwrecks. "The pleasure is entirely ours, Ambassador," King Neptune replied with practiced diplomacy. Your kingdom's reputation for culinary excellence precedes you. Coral caught the slight pause in her father's voice, as if he still found the human obsession with sweets somewhat baffling, even after years of profitable partnership. Ambassador Honeycomb's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Indeed, Your Majesty. This year marks the 20th anniversary of our Great Sweet Festival, and we're particularly excited about the new confectionery innovations we've developed using your realm's unique mineral deposits. The way your crystalline sea salts interact with sugar creates flavors that simply cannot be replicated anywhere else in the world. Coral's sisters exchanged polite but disinterested glances, clearly viewing this as tedious trade talk. But Coral felt as though lightning was coursing through her veins. A festival dedicated entirely to sweets, an entire kingdom where confectionery was not just appreciated, but elevated to an art form. She imagined streets lined with candy shops, plazas filled with the aroma of baking pastries, and artisans who spent their lives perfecting the very treats she could only dream about. "Tell me, Ambassador," her sister Seashell interjected with royal politeness, "what other industries does your kingdom pursue? Surely confectionery cannot be your only export." The ambassador chuckled warmly. "Oh, Princess, but it very nearly is. Dulasher has built its entire economy around the sweet arts. We have the Guild of Chocolatiers, whose master craftsmen train for decades to perfect their techniques. Our sugar sculptors create edible artwork that rivals the finest marble carvings. The honey distillers produce varieties of sweeteners so rare that kings from distant lands journey specifically to taste them. And our cake architects," he paused dramatically, "they design confections so magnificent that they're displayed in galleries before being consumed at royal celebrations." Coral's jaw dropped. An entire civilization dedicated to the art she'd been collecting in secret. While she'd been hoarding broken pieces of candy from shipwrecks, there was a whole kingdom where such treasures were created daily by master artisans. The irony was almost overwhelming. Her father had been trading with these people for years, enabling their craft, while she remained hidden away like some embarrassing secret. "How fascinating," King Neptune said, though Coral detected a note of bemusement in his voice. "And I trust this year's festival will be particularly sweet?" "Beyond imagination, Your Majesty. We're unveiling the world's largest chocolate fountain, hosting competitions for the most innovative candy creation. And our prince himself will be judging the Royal Confectionery Championships. Prince Cacao has quite the refined palate. Some say he can identify the origin of sugar crystals by taste alone." As the ambassador continued describing the wonders of Dulasher, Coral felt a familiar ache in her chest. Here was everything she'd ever dreamed of, existing just beyond the waves, while she remained trapped in a world that viewed her passion as shameful frivolity. The trading relationship that should have brought her closer to her dreams instead served as a constant reminder of how far away they remained. But as she listened to tales of sugar palaces and chocolate rivers, Coral began to form a dangerous thought. If the kingdoms traded regularly, if ships passed between them constantly, perhaps there was a way for her to see this miraculous place for herself. The idea was terrifying and impossible, but it planted itself in her mind like a seed, waiting for the right moment to grow into something more. Chapter 3. Storm and Salvation. 3 weeks after the diplomatic meeting, Coral's dangerous idea had blossomed into an obsession. She'd begun mapping the trade routes between the kingdoms, studying the patterns of merchant vessels, and timing her secret excursions to the surface with increasing precision. Her collection had grown substantially as she salvaged from more recent wrecks, but her hunger for the real thing, for fresh confections from their place of origin, had become almost unbearable. The night everything changed began with an ominous crimson sunset that painted the ocean's surface like spilled wine. Coral had been lurking near her favorite observation point, a hidden cave system that offered perfect views of the shipping lanes when she spotted an elegant vessel bearing the royal crest of Dulasher. Unlike the sturdy merchant ships that usually plied these waters, this craft was a masterpiece of naval architecture, with gilt decorations that caught the dying light and sails of midnight blue silk that billowed majestically in the evening breeze. She should have returned to the depths immediately. Royal vessels meant important cargo, important passengers, and the kind of attention that could expose her secret activities. But Coral found herself mesmerized by the ship's beauty and the tantalizing possibility that it might be carrying confections worthy of royalty itself. She followed at a safe distance, her powerful tail allowing her to keep pace effortlessly as the vessel sailed toward Dulasher's distant shores. The storm struck with the suddenness of divine wrath. One moment the sea was merely restless, with choppy waves that made the ship dance gracefully across the water. The next, the sky exploded into a chaos of lightning and thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ocean. Coral had experienced countless storms from the safety of the depths, but witnessing one from near the surface was a revelation of nature's terrifying power. The royal vessel, for all its elegant beauty, was no match for the fury that descended upon it. Coral watched in horror as waves the size of castle towers crashed over the deck, sending crew members scrambling for safety. The ship's masts snapped like twigs, and the carefully maintained sails tore into ribbons that whipped frantically in the howling wind. She could hear the screams of terror and the splintering of wood as the storm systematically destroyed the magnificent craft. When the ship finally succumbed to the tempest's assault, Coral didn't hesitate. Royal passenger or common sailor, she couldn't let anyone drown while she had the power to help. She dove through the churning waters, dodging debris and fighting currents that threatened to dash her against the jagged rocks of a nearby reef. The sea around the wreck was a nightmare of floating cargo, broken timber, and desperately swimming survivors. She found him floating unconscious near the ship's ornate figurehead, his fine clothes waterlogged but his grip still tight around an elaborate wooden box that bore the unmistakable craftsmanship of a master artisan. Even unconscious and half-drowned, there was something captivating about him. The strong line of his jaw, dark hair that floated like silk in the water, and an elegant grace that spoke of nobility. But it was more than his obvious royal bearing that made Coral's heart skip a beat. There was something in his peaceful expression, even in unconsciousness, that spoke of gentleness and intelligence. His hands, pale and refined, looked more accustomed to delicate work than manual labor, and she could imagine them carefully crafting the very confections she so adored. In that moment, as lightning illuminated his face through the churning water above, Coral felt something shift deep within her chest. This wasn't just curiosity about a human or excitement over potential confections. This was something entirely new and overwhelming. She'd fallen in love at first sight with this mysterious prince, and suddenly her dreams of visiting Dulasher took on a completely different dimension. It wasn't just about the sweets anymore. It was about him. Coral grasped him carefully and swam toward the nearest shore, using every ounce of her strength to navigate the treacherous currents while keeping his head above water. The storm raged overhead, but she spotted a sheltered cave carved into the coastal cliffs, its entrance partially hidden by cascading seaweed and large rocks that would protect them from the worst of the tempest's fury. The cave extended back into the cliff face with a small, sandy beach where the tide had deposited smooth stones and shells over countless years. She dragged him onto the sandy beach within the cave, checking anxiously for signs of breathing. The natural shelter provided some protection from the storm's fury, though she could still hear the thunder echoing off the cave walls and see lightning illuminating the entrance intermittently. As she worked to revive him, pressing water from his lungs and using pieces of her own clothing to warm his chilled body, Coral found herself studying his features with an intensity that had nothing to do with medical necessity. The way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheekbones, the slight curve of his lips that suggested someone who smiled often, the calluses on his fingertips that spoke of hands-on work with delicate ingredients. Every detail seemed to etch itself into her memory. She'd never been this close to a human before, let alone one who made her pulse race in ways she'd never experienced. When she finally noticed the box he'd refused to release even in unconsciousness, her curiosity was now doubly motivated. This wasn't just about confections anymore. This was about understanding the world that had created this fascinating man. Coral carefully pried the box from his grip, her fingers trembling not just from excitement about its contents, but from the brief contact with his hands. Inside, nestled in compartments lined with the finest silk, lay an assortment of confections so exquisite they took her breath away. These weren't the water-damaged candies of her collection. These were perfect specimens of the confectioner's art. Chocolates shaped like tiny seashells with pearl-like centers that seemed to glow with inner light. Crystallized fruits that looked like jewels carved from rainbow light, and delicate pastries filled with creams of impossible colors. The aroma that rose from the box was intoxicating, hints of vanilla and cinnamon, exotic spices she couldn't identify, and the rich, complex scent of chocolate so pure it seemed almost otherworldly. Unable to resist, Coral selected a single chocolate shaped like a rose and placed it on her tongue. The flavor that exploded across her palate was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, but now it carried even deeper meaning. This wasn't just a perfect confection. This was a creation from his world, possibly even made by his own hands. It wasn't just sweet. It was a symphony of tastes that seemed to tell the story of the kingdom that had shaped him, the traditions he'd grown up with, and the artistry that defined his life. She could taste notes of sea salt that she recognized from her father's trade goods, but transformed into something magical that enhanced rather than dominated the chocolate's richness. As the exquisite flavors melted on her tongue, Coral realized that her desires had become impossibly tangled. Her love of sweets and her newfound love for this mysterious prince had woven together into something far more powerful than either passion alone. She didn't just want to visit Dulasher anymore. She wanted to be part of his world, to understand the kingdom that had created someone so captivating. And perhaps, if she dared to dream, to find a place beside him in that sweet paradise. As the prince began to stir, Coral realized she'd made a terrible mistake. Not only had she stolen one of his precious confections, but she'd revealed her presence to someone who could expose her secret activities. The cave, while offering shelter, was far too close to human territories for comfort. Panic overwhelmed her, and she grabbed the empty chocolate wrapper, quickly concealing any evidence of her transgression, before retreating to the cave's darker recesses and then slipping back into the churning sea. Prince Cacao awakened slowly, coughing seawater and struggling to orient himself in the dim light filtering into the cave from the storm-darkened entrance. His first instinct was to check his precious box, and Coral watched from the cave's entrance, hidden beneath the water's surface, as confusion crossed his noble features. One chocolate was missing, leaving only an empty silk compartment where the rose had been. He looked around the natural cave with wonder and growing bewilderment, clearly trying to piece together how he'd survived the shipwreck and who might have brought him to this sheltered place. When he finally gathered enough strength to explore the cave's perimeter and venture toward the entrance, calling out thanks to his mysterious savior in a voice that was warm and musical, Coral had to fight every instinct that urged her to reveal herself from her hiding place just beyond the cave mouth. She wanted nothing more than to surface, to speak with him, to learn his name, to discover if he was truly the Prince Cacao she'd heard about in the diplomatic meetings. But fear and social impossibility held her back. What could a mermaid princess, especially one considered the black sheep of her family, possibly offer to a human prince? When Coral finally swam away through the storm-tossed waters, leaving the cave and its occupant behind, she carried with her more than just the memory of perfect chocolate. She'd left behind the empty wrapper on the cave's sandy floor, But she'd gained something infinitely more precious and dangerous, a face to attach to her dreams, a voice that would echo in her memory, and a love that would drive her to risk everything for the chance to walk in his world. The hunger that had awakened in that coastal cave wasn't just for sweets anymore. It was for a life she'd never dared imagine possible. Chapter 4. Vortex's Dark Bargain. In the weeks following Prince Cacao's rescue, Coral's world had become a prison of longing. Every night, she returned to the waters near the coastal cave, hoping to catch another glimpse of the prince, but the shoreline remained empty, except for the occasional fisherman or merchant vessel. Her collection of human sweets, once her greatest treasure, now seemed like a pathetic mockery of the real confections she'd tasted from his box. Even worse, the memory of that single chocolate rose had spoiled her enjoyment of everything else. Every piece of kelp candy or crystallized sea foam she tried tasted flat and lifeless in comparison. Her family had noticed her distraction immediately. During the weekly royal dinners, Coral sat silent and melancholy while her sisters discussed diplomatic triumphs and cultural achievements. King Neptune had attempted several times to engage her in conversation about her interests, but how could she explain that her heart now belonged to a human prince she'd met for mere moments? Her obsession with human confections had been embarrassing enough. Confessing to falling in love with a surface dweller would be utterly scandalous. Coral seems particularly troubled lately, she'd overheard her sister Pearl whisper to their father after last week's council meeting. Perhaps it's time we found her a suitable match among the mermen nobility. A good marriage might cure her of these strange human fascinations. The suggestion had filled Coral with such horror that she'd fled immediately to her secret grotto, where she spent hours staring at her collection and trying to imagine Prince Cacao's hands creating the masterpieces she'd salvaged from shipwrecks. But even her sanctuary felt different now. Instead of bringing comfort, it reminded her of everything she could never have. She was trapped between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, with desires that grew more impossible each day. It was during one of these desperate midnight vigils that Coral made her fateful decision. She'd heard whispers throughout her life about Vortex, the sea sorcerer who operated in the darkest corners of the ocean's black market. Sailors spoke of him in terrified whispers. Merfolk crossed themselves when his name was mentioned, and even the bravest warriors avoided the treacherous waters where he made his lair. But Vortex was also known for granting impossible wishes for a price that few were willing to pay. The journey to Vortex's domain took Coral through parts of the ocean she'd never seen, where the water grew progressively darker and more forbidding. Strange creatures with too many eyes lurked in the shadows, and the very seaweed seemed to reach out with grasping tendrils. The sorcerer's lair was carved into a massive trench where volcanic vents created twisted spires of black stone, their surfaces gleaming with an eerie phosphorescent light that made Coral's scales crawl with unease. "Well, well," Vortex's voice echoed from the shadows before the sea sorcerer himself emerged, his powerful scorpion tail undulating gracefully as he moved. He was both more and less terrifying than the stories suggested, ancient and powerful, but with eyes that gleamed with shrewd intelligence and something else that made Coral deeply uncomfortable. His humanoid torso was muscled and imposing, but it was the predatory way he looked at her that sent shivers down her spine. "Princess Coral, the little collector. I wondered when you might find your way to my humble establishment." Coral's courage nearly failed her in that moment. Everything about Vortex's lair spoke of danger. The bottles filled with swirling mists that might have been souls, the contracts written in languages that hurt to look at, and the subtle sense that she was being evaluated not as a client, but as prey. But the memory of Prince Cacao's voice calling out his gratitude and the taste of that perfect chocolate rose gave her strength to speak. "I need your help," Coral said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I want to walk on land, to live among humans. I know you deal in impossible things." Vortex's laugh was like the sound of grinding stone mixed with the click of chitin.
Oh, my dear child, you have no idea how impossible your request truly is. But impossible is my specialty, and I do so love a challenge.
The sea sorcerer circled Coral slowly, his scorpion tail leaving trails of bioluminescent sparks in the water, while his humanoid form maintained an uncomfortably intimate distance. Tell me, what drives this sudden desire for legs? Surely not just your little hobby with human confections. Heat flooded Coral's cheeks, but she forced herself to meet Vortex's predatory gaze. There's someone, a human prince. I saved his life, and now I can't stop thinking about him, about his world. I want to be part of it.
Ah, love!
Vortex clapped his hands together with delight, but his smile revealed too many teeth. The most powerful motivation of all, and the most profitable for someone in my line of work. Yes, I can give you what you desire, sweet princess. Legs that will allow you to walk on land, and all the time you need to win your prince's heart. Coral's heart soared, but she knew better than to trust a sea sorcerer's generosity. What's the price? Vortex's smile widened until it seemed to dominate his entire face. So refreshingly direct. I appreciate that in a client. The price, my dear, is deliciously appropriate for someone with your unique interests. From the moment you gain those legs, you will lose forever your ability to taste any sweetness that comes from the sea. No more kelp candy, no more crystallized sea foam, no more of those charming little sugar formations you've been collecting. The ocean's confections will become as flavorless as sand on your tongue. The price was cruel in its precision, striking at Coral's original passion with surgical accuracy. But compared to the alternative of never seeing Prince Cacao again, it seemed almost manageable. That's all? Oh, precious child. Did you think I was running a charity? Vortex's tail writhed with amusement as he circled closer. The loss of taste is merely the appetizer. The main course is far more substantial. You will have exactly 1 month to make your prince fall genuinely in love with you. Not infatuation, not attraction, but true love that he declares willingly and without coercion. If you succeed, you may keep your human form forever and regain your ability to taste the sea's sweetness. If you fail... He paused dramatically, his tail now close enough that Coral could feel the heat radiating from its venomous tip. If you fail, you will become my bride. You will return to the depths as my wife, bound to me for eternity. Coral felt the blood drain from her face. Your bride? Yes, my beautiful princess. I have been searching for a suitable wife for centuries, and you possess exactly the qualities I desire. Royal blood, exceptional beauty, and a spirit strong enough to survive my particular nature. His eyes gleamed with anticipation. I have had wives before, of course, but they proved disappointingly fragile. You, however, have the strength of will to endure what they could not. The implication was clear and terrifying. Vortex's previous wives hadn't simply left or divorced him, they had died, likely under circumstances that were far from natural. The sea sorcerer wasn't just asking for a sacrifice, he was demanding Coral's entire future as collateral, with marriage to a creature known for being cruel and calculating as the consequence of failure. 1 month to accomplish something that might take years, Coral whispered, with becoming your wife as the price of failure, and your previous wives. Accidents happen, Vortex said with casual indifference. The ocean depths can be so dangerous, especially for those who displease their husbands. But I have high hopes that you will prove more durable than your predecessors. It was madness, suicide disguised as opportunity. But as she hesitated, Coral's mind filled with images of Prince Cacao's gentle face, the sound of his voice thanking his unknown savior, and the intoxicating taste of confections created in his world. She thought of the life she was living now, trapped between her family's disapproval and her own impossible dreams, growing more miserable with each passing day. At least Vortex's bargain offered hope, no matter how slim, and the alternative was a lifetime of regret. "I accept," Coral whispered, and the words seemed to echo through the volcanic cavern like a death sentence. Vortex's smile widened until it seemed to fill the entire lair. "Excellent. I do so enjoy working with clients who understand the value of taking risks. And may I say, my dear, that I look forward immensely to our wedding ceremony, should your human prince prove disappointing. Shall we begin immediately? I have a feeling this particular transaction will be one of my more entertaining investments." Chapter 5. Transformation and First Steps. The transformation ritual was unlike anything Coral could have imagined. Vortex's lair filled with an otherworldly energy as the sea sorcerer began weaving spells that seemed to bend reality itself. Ancient words in languages that predated civilization echoed through the volcanic cavern, and the water around them began to shimmer with colors that had no names. Coral felt the magic seeping into her very essence, rewriting the fundamental nature of her being with each incantation. "The process will be uncomfortable," Vortex warned with obvious relish as he added ingredients to a cauldron that seemed to contain liquid starlight. "I'm essentially rebuilding you from the inside out, after all. Human physiology is so much more limited than our aquatic perfection, but it has its own crude charm." Coral barely had time to brace herself before the pain began. It felt as though her tail was being split by lightning. Her bones restructured themselves with audible cracks. The worst part was the moment her ability to taste sea sweetness vanished. She felt it leave her like a limb being severed, a fundamental part of her identity simply disappearing into the void. When the transformation finally completed, Coral found herself gasping on the sandy floor of a shallow tidal pool near Dulasher's main harbor. Her new legs felt impossibly strange and fragile, like trying to balance on two delicate fins. But most shocking of all was her voice. It remained completely intact, clear and melodious as ever. "Vortex let me keep my voice?" Coral whispered to herself, then immediately covered her mouth in surprise at how the sound carried through the air instead of water. She struggled to her feet, using nearby rocks for support, as she tested these alien appendages. Walking was harder than it looked from her underwater observations. Every step required conscious thought and balance, but gradually, Coral began to understand the mechanics of human movement, and within an hour, she was taking tentative steps along the shoreline. Her first glimpse of Dulasher proper took her breath away. The city rose from the harbor like something from a fairy tale, with buildings that seemed constructed entirely of gingerbread and spun sugar. The architecture followed flowing, organic lines that reminded her of coral formations, but instead of underwater blues and greens, everything was painted in warm colors that spoke of honey, caramel, and cinnamon. Even the cobblestones beneath her feet had a slight golden hue, as if they'd been dusted with crystallized sugar. The aroma that filled the air was intoxicating beyond description. Coral had caught hints of human confectionery from shipwrecks and trade vessels, but experiencing it at the source was overwhelming. Every breath brought new discoveries. The rich scent of chocolate melting in nearby shops, the yeasty sweetness of fresh pastries, and underlying it all, the complex perfume of 1,000 different sugars and spices working in harmony. Coral's first challenge came immediately: clothing. Her transformation had left her wearing nothing but her long hair and whatever modesty the seafoam provided. Fortunately, she spotted a clothesline behind one of the harbor-front buildings, where a simple blue dress and white apron hung drying in the morning sun. The theft made her uncomfortable, but survival demanded compromises. The dress fit reasonably well, though walking in human clothing added another layer of complexity to her already challenging mobility. As she ventured deeper into the city, Coral realized that her timing couldn't have been more perfect. Colorful banners hung from every building announcing the great sweet festival, and the streets buzzed with preparations for the celebration. Vendors were setting up elaborate displays of confections. Street performers practiced acts involving edible props, and the very air seemed to vibrate with excitement and sugar-fueled energy. Her destination became clear when she saw the massive structure dominating the city's center, the Royal Confectionery Palace. Unlike the warm, inviting buildings that surrounded it, this edifice was a masterpiece of architectural ambition. Its towers spiraled like candy canes, its walls were decorated with intricate sugar work that caught the light like stained glass, and from its highest spire flew a banner bearing what could only be the royal coat of arms, a golden whisk crossed with a silver spoon on a field of chocolate brown. "Excuse me, miss," a kind voice said behind her. Coral turned to find a plump woman in a flour-dusted apron regarding her with concern. "You look a bit lost, dear. Are you here for the festival?" Coral realized this was her first real test of human interaction. "Yes, I've traveled a long way to be here. I'm hoping to find work, perhaps in one of the confectionery shops." The woman's eyes lit up with understanding. "Ah, another young apprentice seeking her fortune in the sweet arts. Well, you've certainly come to the right place. The festival brings opportunities for those with talent and determination. Have you any experience with confectionery work?" Coral's mind raced. How could she explain her knowledge without revealing its impossible source? "I have extensive experience with flavor combinations and an unusual understanding of how different ingredients interact. I've studied the craft for years, though I've never worked in a formal kitchen." "Studied from where, if you don't mind my asking? Most of our techniques are closely guarded secrets." "From abroad," Coral said carefully. "My methods might seem unconventional, but I believe I could contribute something unique to the right establishment." The woman smiled warmly. "Well, unconventional might be exactly what we need. I'm Mrs. Butterscotch, head baker at the Silver Spoon Confectionery. We're always looking for fresh talent, especially during festival season. Why don't you come with me, and we'll see what you can do?" As Coral followed Mrs. Butterscotch through the winding streets toward the Silver Spoon, she felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Her new legs were growing more steady with each step, and ahead of her lay the chance to prove herself in the world she'd always dreamed of joining. But underlying her excitement was the constant awareness of time ticking away. She had exactly 30 days to find Prince Cacao, make him fall in love with her, and avoid the fate that awaited her if she failed. The Silver Spoon Confectionery turned out to be a charming establishment tucked between a chocolate sculptor's studio and a honey distillery. Through its windows, Coral could see apprentices working at marble tables, rolling dough and tempering chocolate with the focused precision of master craftsmen. This was her chance to prove that her unconventional knowledge could translate into real-world success, and perhaps, if she was extraordinarily lucky, to cross paths with a certain prince who was known for his refined palate and appreciation of exceptional confections. "Well then," Mrs. Butterscotch said as she held open the shop's door, "let's see what magic you can create with sugar and spice." Chapter 6. Coral's Sweet Talents Emerge. The interior of the Silver Spoon Confectionery was a wonderland that exceeded even Coral's most vivid underwater fantasies. Copper molds in countless shapes lined the walls, from delicate flowers to elaborate architectural miniatures. Steam rose from tempering machines that kept chocolate at perfect working temperatures, while nearby apprentices pulled sugar into gossamer-thin decorations that seemed to defy gravity. The air was thick with the scents of vanilla, cinnamon, and that indefinable aroma of pure craftsmanship that spoke of generations of accumulated knowledge. "Here's our main workstation," Mrs. Butterscotch explained, gesturing to a massive marble table surrounded by an array of tools that looked both familiar and foreign to Coral. "We're preparing for the festival's grand competition, the Royal Confectionery championships. Every shop in Dulasher will present their finest creation to be judged by Prince Cacao himself. The winning establishment receives the honor of providing confections for all royal events for the coming year. Coral's heart skipped at the mention of Prince Cacao. This was exactly the opportunity she'd hoped for, a chance to demonstrate her skills while potentially attracting the attention of the very person she needed to enchant. But first, she had to prove herself worthy of participating in such a prestigious competition. "What would you like me to attempt?" Coral asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of her voice. Mrs. Butterscotch considered her carefully. "Let's start with something fundamental. Can you temper chocolate? It's the foundation of all serious confectionery work, but many apprentices struggle with it for months." Coral approached the workstation with confidence born from years of theoretical knowledge gleaned from her collection studies. She'd watched chocolate work in salvaged confectionery books, memorized the temperature ranges from overheard merchant conversations, and understood the crystalline structures involved even if she'd never attempted the process herself. Her hands seemed to know what to do as she began heating the chocolate, stirring it with a rhythm that felt as natural as swimming. The other apprentices gradually stopped their own work to watch as Coral manipulated the chocolate through its precise temperature changes. She could sense the exact moment when the crystals aligned properly, feel the subtle shift in texture that indicated perfect temper, and recognize the glossy sheen that marked success. When she finally poured the chocolate into a test mold, it set with the distinctive snap and mirror-like finish that marked master-level work. "Extraordinary," Mrs. Butterscotch breathed, examining the finished piece. "I've never seen anyone achieve perfect temper on their first attempt. Where did you say you learned this technique?" "I studied extensively with masters who emphasized understanding the fundamental science behind the craft," Coral said carefully. It was technically true, even if those masters had been dead sailors whose recipe books she'd salvaged from shipwrecks. Emboldened by her success, Coral began experimenting with flavor combinations that had long existed only in her imagination. She created chocolates infused with essences that reminded her of sea spray, but translated into terrestrial terms, salted caramels that captured the essence of ocean mists, and ganaches flavored with exotic vanilla that somehow evoked the mystery of deep waters without any oceanic ingredients at all. Her most ambitious creation was a chocolate sculpture that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. Using techniques she'd theorized about during her underwater observations, Coral crafted a piece that looked like a wave caught at the moment of breaking, complete with delicate sugar work that mimicked sea foam. The sculpture was impossible to ignore. It drew the eye with its fluid grace and held attention with its technical perfection. "This is unlike anything I've seen in 20 years of confectionery work," one of the senior apprentices whispered to another. "She's creating art that tells stories." Word of Coral's extraordinary abilities spread quickly through the confectionery district. By midday, representatives from other shops were finding excuses to visit the Silver Spoon, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious new apprentice whose work was already becoming legendary. Coral found herself simultaneously thrilled and terrified by the attention she needed to be noticed to have any chance of meeting Prince Cacao, but too much scrutiny might expose her otherworldly origins. Her breakthrough came when Mrs. Butterscotch approached her with obvious excitement. "Coral, I've just received the most incredible opportunity. The Royal Palace has requested that our shop provide afternoon refreshments for Prince Cacao's private tasting sessions this week. He's been sampling confections from every establishment in preparation for the championship judging, and he specifically asked to try work from our newest apprentice after hearing rumors about your unique style." Coral's pulse raced. This was happening faster than she'd dared hope. "When?" "Tomorrow afternoon. The prince holds these sessions in the palace's private confectionery kitchen, away from the formal court protocols. It's said to be the only place where he can truly focus on the nuances of flavor and technique without royal distractions." Mrs. Butterscotch paused, studying Coral's expression. Are you prepared for such an honor? Prince Cacao is known for his extraordinarily refined palate. Some say he can identify the origin of sugar crystals by taste alone and detect flavor notes that escape even master confectioners. Coral thought of the chocolate rose she'd stolen from his collection, how its complex flavors had revealed layers of meaning she'd never experienced before. If Prince Cacao possessed such sensitivity to taste, perhaps he would recognize something familiar in her work, some echo of the oceanic influences that shaped her understanding of flavor harmony. "I'm ready," Coral said with more confidence than she felt. "I'll create something that tells a story he's never heard before." That evening, as Coral worked alone in the Silver Spoon's kitchen by candlelight, she began crafting her masterpiece for the prince. It would be a collection of confections that somehow captured the essence of her rescue. The storm's fury translated into dark chocolate with crystallized ginger. The cave's shelter represented by delicate white chocolate shells filled with honey cream, and the moment of connection expressed through a chocolate rose identical to the one she'd tasted that fateful night. Each piece required techniques she was inventing as she worked, combining her theoretical knowledge with inspiration born from genuine emotion. She was creating edible poetry, confections that would speak to Prince Cacao's soul even if he never learned their creator's true identity. But as she worked, Coral couldn't shake the awareness that she was gambling everything on a single afternoon's impression. If she failed to captivate him tomorrow, she would have wasted precious days from her already impossible deadline. 29 days remained until Vortex claimed her as his bride, and everything depended on whether a prince who valued exceptional sweets above all else would recognize the extraordinary passion that drove the mysterious apprentice who had appeared just in time for his kingdom's greatest celebration. Chapter 7. Vortex's Sabotage begins. The royal palace's confectionery kitchen was a temple to the sweet arts, with soaring ceilings that allowed the aromatic essence of countless creations to mingle and mature like fine wine. Copper pots gleamed on marble countertops, and specialized ovens maintained precise temperatures for different types of baking. Coral arrived carrying her carefully crafted collection in a silk-lined presentation box, her heart hammering with anticipation and terror in equal measure. Prince Cacao entered the kitchen with an elegance that made Coral's breath catch in her throat. He was even more handsome than she remembered from that storm-tossed night in the cave. His dark hair caught the afternoon light streaming through tall windows, and his eyes held the same intelligent warmth that had captivated her during those brief moments of rescue. He wore simple clothes, suitable for working with confections, but his bearing remained unmistakably royal. "You must be the mysterious apprentice everyone's been discussing," he said with a smile that made Coral's knees feel weak. "I'm Prince Cacao, though in this kitchen, I prefer to think of myself simply as someone who appreciates exceptional craftsmanship." "I'm Coral," she managed, offering a curtsy that felt awkward after a lifetime of swimming. "I'm honored by this opportunity, Your Highness. Please, just cacao when we're discussing confections. Royal protocols tend to interfere with honest evaluation of flavors." He gestured toward her presentation box with obvious curiosity. "Mrs. Butterscotch tells me you've created something specifically for this tasting. I confess, I'm intrigued. It's rare to encounter genuinely original work in a field as traditional as ours." Coral opened her box with trembling fingers, revealing the collection she'd spent the entire night perfecting. The storm chocolates gleamed like dark jewels, the cave shelter whites seemed to glow with inner light, and the chocolate rose sat at the center, like a crown jewel of edible artistry. She'd never felt more vulnerable than in this moment, offering her heart's work to the man she'd fallen in love with at first sight. Prince Cacao's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine amazement as he examined each piece. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary, but there's something more. These pieces seem to tell a story. Would you care to explain your inspiration?" Before Coral could respond, something went terribly wrong. The storm chocolates, which had been perfect just moments before, began to develop an unsightly white bloom that spoke of temperature shock. The delicate white chocolate shells started to crack, their honey cream centers beginning to leak. Most horrifying of all, the chocolate rose began to lose its precise definition, its petals softening into an unrecognizable mass. I don't understand," Coral stammered, watching her masterpiece deteriorate before her eyes. "They were perfect this morning. I checked every detail multiple times." Prince Cacao frowned, his experienced eye taking in the rapid deterioration. "This appears to be sabotage rather than poor technique. The damage patterns are too uniform to be accidental." He looked at Coral with concern rather than accusation. "Someone has deliberately ruined your work." But why? Coral felt a chill that had nothing to do with the kitchen's temperature. In the depths of her memory, she could hear Vortex's voice promising that the month would be entertaining. The sea sorcerer wasn't content to simply wait for Coral to fail naturally. He was actively working to ensure failure through supernatural interference. "Perhaps we could reschedule," Coral suggested desperately. "I could create new pieces, demonstrate that my work isn't normally so unreliable." "Actually," Prince Cacao said thoughtfully, "I'd like to see you work. The destruction of finished pieces tells me nothing about your actual abilities, but watching your process might be far more instructive." He gestured toward the kitchen's workstations. "Would you be willing to create something fresh? I have time, and I confess my curiosity is thoroughly aroused." Coral's spirits lifted slightly. If she could demonstrate her skills directly, perhaps she could overcome whatever sabotage Vortex had planned. She approached the workstation with renewed determination, selecting ingredients for a simple but elegant chocolate ganache that would showcase her understanding of flavor balance. But as she began working, the interference continued. The cream she heated for ganache scorched despite her careful temperature control. Sugar that should have dissolved smoothly turned grainy and unusable. Even the chocolate itself seemed to fight her efforts, refusing to melt properly despite the perfect heat settings. Every technique that had worked flawlessly the day before now produced disastrous results. "This is impossible," Coral whispered, staring at her third failed attempt at something that should have been elementary. "I've never had problems like this before." Prince Cacao had been watching her struggles with growing sympathy rather than disappointment. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been judging confectionery work for years, and I've learned to distinguish between lack of skill and external interference. What I'm seeing here isn't the work of an incompetent apprentice, it's the result of deliberate sabotage." Coral looked up at him with surprise. "You believe me? Your hand movements, your instinctive timing, your understanding of ingredient interactions, all of these demonstrate genuine mastery. Whatever is causing these failures, it's not coming from you." He paused, studying her face carefully. "I've also been wondering if we've met before. There's something familiar about you, though I can't quite place where or when." Coral's heart raced. Was it possible that he remembered something from their brief encounter in the cave? Before she could respond, another wave of supernatural interference struck. The marble countertop itself seemed to develop an uneven temperature, making it impossible to work chocolate properly. Measuring spoons gave incorrect readings, and even the air in the kitchen took on a subtle bitter taste that would contaminate any delicate flavors. "I think," Prince Cacao said with obvious regret, "we should postpone this session until whatever force is working against you has been identified and dealt with. But I want you to know that I've seen enough to recognize exceptional talent, even under these impossible circumstances." As Coral packed away her ruined ingredients, her mind raced with desperate plans. Vortex's interference was more sophisticated and thorough than she'd anticipated. The sea sorcerer wasn't just creating random obstacles, he was systematically destroying Coral's opportunities to connect with Prince Cacao through their shared passion for confectionery arts. If this continued, Coral would never have a chance to make him fall in love with her, no matter how perfect her techniques or how genuine her feelings. "Your Highness," Coral said as they prepared to leave the kitchen, "if I could find a way to overcome these technical difficulties, would you be willing to give me another chance?" Prince Cacao's smile was warm and encouraging. "Of course. In fact, I'm hosting a small gathering tomorrow evening for Dulcashire's most promising confectionery artists. It's an informal affair where we discuss techniques and share new ideas. If you'd like to attend, perhaps we could continue our conversation in a less cursed environment." As Coral walked back through Dulcashire's sugar-scented streets, she felt the weight of Vortex's manipulation pressing down on her like the depths of the ocean itself. The sea sorcerer was playing a far more complex game than simple time pressure. He was actively preventing Coral from succeeding while maintaining the technical possibility of victory. It was cruelty disguised as fairness, and Coral realized she would need to find a way to outmaneuver supernatural sabotage if she had any hope of avoiding becoming his bride. 28 days remained, and the real battle for her freedom was just beginning. Chapter 8. Love Through Shared Passion. Coral spent the night before Prince Cacao's gathering preparing for battle. If Vortex was going to sabotage her confectionery work, she would need to find ways to connect with the prince that transcended physical creations. She studied every book about Dulcashire's confectionery history that she could find in the Silver Spoon's library, memorized flavor profiles from her salvaged collection notes, and practiced techniques that might be too quick for supernatural interference to disrupt. The gathering was held in Prince Cacao's private study, a room that revealed as much about his character as any formal introduction could. The walls were lined with books on confectionery techniques from around the world. Shelves displayed sugar sculptures from master artisans of previous generations, and carefully controlled glass cases protected rare chocolate samples from distant lands. It was the sanctuary of someone who didn't just practice the sweet arts, but lived and breathed them with genuine passion. Coral arrived wearing her best dress, a simple but elegant creation that Mrs. Butterscotch had lent her for the occasion. She felt impossibly nervous among the dozen other confectionery artists who had gathered for the evening, many of whom were established masters with decades of experience. But when Prince Cacao greeted her with a warm smile and introduced her as the talented Coral, whose work was unfortunately compromised yesterday, she felt some of her confidence return. "I've been thinking about your flavor combinations," Prince Cacao said as he guided her toward a comfortable chair near the fireplace. "That ganache you attempted, the one with sea salt and dark chocolate, the concept was extraordinarily sophisticated. Where did you develop that particular pairing?" Coral's heart raced. This was exactly the kind of conversation she'd hoped for, but she needed to be careful not to reveal too much about her oceanic origins. "I've always been fascinated by the way certain minerals can enhance rather than compete with chocolate's natural complexity. Salt, when used precisely, can make sweetness more profound rather than simply adding another flavor layer." "Exactly!" Prince Cacao's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Most people think of salt as a contrasting element, but you understand its role as an amplifier. It's a sophisticated concept that even some master chocolatiers struggle to grasp." As the evening progressed, Coral found herself drawn into increasingly complex discussions about confectionery theory. Despite Vortex's best efforts to sabotage her practical work, the sea sorcerer couldn't interfere with Coral's knowledge or her natural understanding of flavor harmony. When the conversation turned to the chemistry of sugar crystallization, Coral's insights from studying her underwater collection proved invaluable. Her unique perspective viewing confectionery arts from the outside as something precious and mysterious gave her observations of freshness that captivated everyone present. "You have such an unusual way of describing flavors," observed Master Honeysuckle, one of Dulcashire's most respected confectionery teachers. "You talk about chocolate having depths and ganache having currents of taste, It's almost poetic. Coral felt heat rise in her cheeks. I suppose I've always thought of flavors as having landscapes, or seascapes rather. Some tastes are shallow and immediate, while others require exploration to discover their true character. Prince Cacao leaned forward with obvious fascination. Seascapes. What an intriguing metaphor. You know, I've always felt that the finest confections should tell stories, take the taster on journeys to places they've never been. Your perspective suggests someone who understands that food can be transformative. The conversation continued late into the evening, but Coral began to notice subtle signs of Vortex's continued interference. Whenever she and Prince Cacao seemed to be developing a particularly strong connection, small disruptions would occur. A servant would accidentally spill wine nearby, requiring attention and interrupting their dialogue. Other guests would suddenly develop urgent questions that demanded the prince's immediate response. Even the fire in the fireplace seemed to flicker and smoke at precisely the wrong moments, creating discomfort that broke the intimacy of their exchanges. But despite these obstacles, Coral felt something genuine growing between them. Prince Cacao's passion for confectionery arts matched her own intensity, and their conversations revealed a shared understanding that transcended mere technical knowledge. They both viewed sweetness as something sacred, a form of edible artistry that could touch the human soul in ways that ordinary food never could. "I have a confession," Prince Cacao said during a quiet moment when the other guests were examining a collection of antique chocolate molds. "Yesterday, when your confections were failing so mysteriously, I found myself more intrigued than disappointed. There was something in your expression, a kind of desperate artistry, that reminded me of someone I've been trying to remember." Coral's breath caught. "Someone you've been trying to remember?" "A few weeks ago, I was shipwrecked during a terrible storm. I should have died, but someone saved my life. When I regained consciousness, I was in a cave near the shore, and my rescuer had vanished. But they left behind evidence of having tasted one of my chocolates, a rose-shaped piece that held particular significance for me." His eyes searched Coral's face carefully. "The way you looked at that chocolate rose yesterday, the way you understood its importance without explanation, it awakened the same sense of recognition I felt in that cave." Coral felt her world tilting. He was so close to the truth, close enough that one honest word from her would reveal everything. But how could she explain that she was the mermaid who had saved him without sounding completely mad? And even if he believed her, would that knowledge help or hinder her chances of making him fall in love with her? "Your rescuer," Coral said carefully, "they must have cared deeply about confectionery arts to understand the significance of that particular chocolate." "Yes," Prince Cacao agreed softly. "That's exactly what I've been thinking. Someone who could recognize the artistry in a single piece, who would taste it with such reverence, that suggests a soul that truly understands what we're trying to achieve when we create sweetness." Before Coral could respond, another wave of Vortex's interference struck. This time, it wasn't subtle. Every candle in the room flickered simultaneously, casting dancing shadows that made normal conversation impossible. The disruption was so obvious that several guests commented on the strange atmospheric disturbance, and Prince Cacao was forced to attend to concerns about the room's ventilation system. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Prince Cacao approached Coral with obvious regret. "I feel as though our conversation was constantly interrupted tonight. Would you be willing to meet again tomorrow? Perhaps somewhere less mysteriously unstable." Coral's heart soared despite the evening's frustrations. "I would love that. There's a small garden behind the palace confectionery workshop. It's where I go when I need to think about new flavor combinations in peace. Would you join me there for afternoon tea? I could bring some of my personal collection chocolates that tell the stories of my travels and discoveries." As Coral walked back through Dulasher's moonlit streets, She felt a complex mixture of hope and determination. Vortex's sabotage was relentless and sophisticated, but it couldn't prevent the genuine connection that was growing between her and Prince Cacao. Their shared passion for confectionery arts was creating a bond that transcended supernatural interference, and his hints about recognizing her suggested that their cave encounter had left a deeper impression than she'd dared hope. 27 days remained, and while Vortex's dark magic continued to complicate every interaction, Coral was beginning to believe that true love might be stronger than a sea sorcerer's schemes. Tomorrow's garden meeting would be another test of that theory, and perhaps the moment when she would have to decide whether honesty about her identity was worth the risk of losing him forever. Chapter 9. Vortex's Defeat and Final Confrontation. The palace garden was a confectionery lover's dream made manifest in living form. Chocolate mint grew alongside vanilla orchids, and the pathways were lined with plants whose fragrances evoked cinnamon, nutmeg, and exotic spices from distant lands. Prince Cacao had prepared an intimate tea service on a marble table beneath a trellis, heavy with honeysuckle vines, and the afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaves in patterns that danced like spun sugar. Coral arrived wearing a dress of pale blue that Mrs. Butterscotch had insisted brought out her eyes, carrying with her a small gift she'd managed to create despite Vortex's interference, a single chocolate seashell filled with salted caramel that she'd crafted in the pre-dawn hours when the sea sorcerer's attention seemed to wane. It wasn't much, but it represented everything she hoped to share with Prince Cacao. Her oceanic origins translated into the language of confections he understood. Coral. Prince Cacao rose to greet her, and the warmth in his voice sent shivers through her entire being. "I'm so glad you came. I've been thinking all night about our conversation, about seascapes and the stories that flavors can tell." As they settled into their chairs, Coral noticed that the garden's atmosphere felt different from their previous meetings. There was a tension in the air, as if invisible forces were gathering strength for some final confrontation. But for the moment, Vortex's interference seemed muted, allowing them to speak without constant interruption. "I brought something for you," Coral said, offering the chocolate seashell with trembling fingers. "I made it this morning, and somehow it turned out perfectly. Perhaps the early hours confused whatever force has been working against my confections." Prince Cacao accepted the gift with obvious delight, examining its delicate craftsmanship before tasting it with the reverence of a true connoisseur. As the flavors bloomed on his palate, his expression shifted from appreciation to wonder, and finally to something approaching recognition. "This is extraordinary," he whispered. "The way the salt enhances the caramel, the precise balance of sweet and savory, it tastes like the ocean itself, but transformed into something purely magical." He looked at Coral with growing intensity. "You know, the morning after my shipwreck, I found traces of salt water on my chocolate collection that couldn't be explained by simple exposure to the storm. Someone had tasted my chocolates with lips that knew the sea." Coral's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment she'd been both hoping for and dreading, the point where truth and deception would collide with consequences she couldn't predict. Before she could decide how to respond, the garden around them began to change. The temperature dropped precipitously, and an unnatural mist began rising from the ground despite the bright sunshine overhead. The honeysuckle vines withered visibly, their sweet fragrance replaced by the bitter smell of deep ocean trenches. Even the chocolate mint plants seemed to recoil as if touched by some malevolent force. "What's happening?" Prince Cacao asked, rising from his chair with concern. From the center of the garden's fountain, a figure began to emerge. Vortex, his scorpion tail writhing with fury as he materialized in the human world through sheer force of magical will. His appearance sent shockwaves through the garden's enchanted atmosphere, and Coral realized that the sea sorcerer had grown tired of subtle sabotage. "Enough of these tiresome games,"
Vortex's voice echoed through the garden with the force of crashing waves. Days of careful manipulation, days of delicate interference, and still this foolish girl inches closer to success. Time for more direct intervention. Prince Cacao stepped protectively in front of Coral, though his confusion was obvious. What manner of creature are you? What do you want? I want what's owed to me, Vortex snarled, his attention fixed entirely on Coral. A bride promised in exchange for legs, a wife pledged as collateral for an impossible dream. Did you really think your pitiful human prince could love someone bound to marry me? He's not what he appears to be, Coral said quietly, her voice steady despite her terror. He's a sea sorcerer, and I made a bargain with him that I'm beginning to regret. Understanding dawned in Prince Cacao's eyes as he looked from Vortex to Coral. You're the one who saved me. You're my mysterious rescuer. I was born beneath the waves, Coral confirmed, finding courage in his lack of revulsion. I'm the mermaid princess who pulled you from that storm, who tasted your chocolate and fell in love with both your world and with you. I traded my tail for legs and risked my freedom for the chance to know you. Vortex's laughter was like the sound of ships breaking apart on hidden reefs. How touching! But love, built on deception, rarely survives revelation. Tell me, Prince, now that you know your charming confectioner is actually a fish with delusions of grandeur, and that she is destined to become my bride, do you still find her so enchanting? Prince Cacao never hesitated. He turned to Coral with eyes full of wonder rather than rejection. You saved my life and asked for nothing in return. You've shared my passion for confectionery arts with an understanding that goes deeper than mere technique. You've brought perspectives to my world that I never could have imagined. He took her hands in his touch warm and certain. I don't care if you were born in the sea or among the stars. I love you for who you are, not where you came from. And no sorcerer's claim will change that. The words hit Vortex like a physical blow. His confident expression wavered as he realized that his final gambit had not only failed, but backfired completely. The revelation of Coral's true nature had strengthened rather than weakened the bond between them. Impossible, Vortex whispered, his form beginning to waver as the magic sustaining his presence in the human world grew unstable. Love doesn't work that way. Humans fear what they don't understand. They reject what seems different. And she belongs to me. Some do, Prince Cacao agreed, his arm now protectively around Coral's waist. But not all of us. And certainly not when that difference brings beauty and wonder into our lives. As for your claim on her love freely given, breaks all chains. Coral felt the sea sorcerer's hold over her future beginning to crack. The magical contract that bound her to the impossible deadline was weakening as its fundamental assumptions proved false. Love wasn't the fragile thing Vortex had calculated on. It was proving stronger than deception, more resilient than supernatural interference, and more powerful than the cynical manipulations of a creature who had forgotten what genuine emotion could accomplish. The contract is void, Coral said with growing confidence. You promised that true love declared willingly would break your hold over me. Prince Cacao has just declared his love knowing exactly what I am and what you demanded of me. Vortex's form was dissolving more rapidly now, his scorpion tail becoming translucent as his connection to the human world severed. This isn't over, he snarled, but his voice carried the hollow ring of defeat. There are other contracts, other desperate souls, other impossible dreams to exploit. But not mine, Coral replied firmly, and not his. As the sea sorcerer's presence faded completely, the garden began to return to its natural state. The withered vines regained their bloom. The bitter odors were replaced by sweet fragrances, and the unnatural mist dissipated
to reveal an afternoon that seemed more beautiful than ever before. Prince Cacao turned to Coral with a smile that outshone the returned sunshine. "So, my mysterious mermaid princess, now that we've dispensed with supernatural interference and ancient curses, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I believe we have a lifetime of confectionery adventures to share." Coral's answer was yes, sealed with a kiss that tasted of chocolate and sea salt, of impossible dreams made real, and of love that had proven stronger than the deepest magic. 26 days still remained on her original deadline, but they no longer mattered. She had already won everything she'd ever dared to hope for. Chapter 10. Sweet Resolution. 6 months after Vortex's defeat, the royal wedding of Prince Cacao and Princess Coral was celebrated throughout Dulasher, with a festival of sweetness that surpassed even the kingdom's most legendary confectionery celebrations. The ceremony itself took place in the palace's grand ballroom. But what made it truly extraordinary was the wedding cake, a towering masterpiece that Coral and Cacao had designed together, incorporating techniques from both land and sea traditions. The cake's foundation was built from layers of chocolate, so dark and rich they seemed to capture the depths of the ocean itself, while delicate sugarwork created waves that seemed to move in the candlelight. Crystallized sea salt from Coral's father's kingdom provided accents that sparkled like captured starlight. And the topmost tier featured a sculpture of 2 figures, one clearly human, one with a flowing tail that suggested oceanic origins, dancing together in eternal celebration. "I still can't believe how perfectly the sea salt enhances the chocolate," Cacao murmured to Coral as they prepared to cut the first slice. "Your father's trade goods have revolutionized our confectionery arts." Coral smiled, thinking of the diplomatic miracle that had followed their engagement. When she'd sent word to her underwater family about her marriage to the human prince, the response had been swift and surprising. Instead of the scandal she'd expected, King Neptune had arrived for the wedding with a full delegation, bringing with him a treasure trove of rare deep-sea ingredients that had previously been unavailable to human confectioners. "My daughter has always been our most unconventional princess," King Neptune had told Prince Cacao during their first formal meeting. "I confess I never understood her passion for human sweets until I witnessed what you two have created together. Perhaps there is wisdom in following one's heart, even when it leads to unexpected shores." The wedding feast that followed the ceremony was a testament to the new era of cooperation between the kingdoms. Coral's sisters had contributed recipes for kelp-based confections that, when properly adapted for human consumption, created entirely new categories of sweets. The Guild of Chocolatiers had worked frantically to master these new techniques, and the results were spectacular candies that seemed to glow with inner light, pastries that evoked the mystery of deep waters, and chocolates that told the story of 2 worlds learning to share their treasures. Coral's official title was now Royal Confectioner, a position created specifically for her unique qualifications. She'd established the first mirror, your human confectionery workshop, where artisans from both realms worked side by side to develop techniques that neither could have achieved alone. The workshop had become a pilgrimage destination for confectioners from around the world, all seeking to learn the secrets of oceanic terrestrial flavor harmony. "You know," Cacao said as they watched their wedding guests sample the various cross-cultural confections, "I keep thinking about that storm-tossed night when you saved my life. If someone had told me then that my rescuer would become my wife and revolutionize our entire industry, I would have thought them mad." Coral laughed, the sound like silver bells mixed with ocean waves. "And if someone had told me that my embarrassing obsession with human sweets would lead to true love and a diplomatic revolution, I would have been equally skeptical." Vortex's defeat had brought unexpected benefits beyond their personal happiness. True to Vortex's original bargain, Coral had regained her ability to taste underwater sweets the moment Prince Cacao declared his love. But more than that, She'd discovered that her time as a human had given her a unique perspective that allowed her to appreciate both worlds' confectionery traditions with equal depth. She was perhaps the only being in existence who could truly understand the full spectrum of sweet possibilities that spanned from the deepest ocean trenches to the highest mountain meadows. The celebration continued long into the night, with musicians playing melodies that blended human instruments with the otherworldly harmonies that Coral's mermaid relatives could create. Children from both kingdoms played together in the palace gardens, sharing candies and creating friendships that would last lifetimes. Even Mrs. Butterscotch was there, beaming with pride at her former apprentice's extraordinary success. "Your Majesty," Ambassador Honeycomb approached Coral with obvious excitement. "The Guild of Chocolatiers has asked me to extend a formal invitation for you to establish a permanent embassy in our sister kingdom of Sugarland. They're particularly interested in your techniques for incorporating sea minerals into ganache work." Coral exchanged glances with her new husband, who nodded enthusiastically. "We'd be honored," she replied, "though I think any diplomatic mission should include representatives from both our kingdoms." The real magic happens when different perspectives work together. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, with small bags of specially created wedding favors chocolates that would remind them of this historic celebration, Coral and Cacao found themselves alone on the palace balcony, looking out over the harbor where mermaid and human ships anchored side by side in unprecedented harmony. "Do you ever regret it?" Cacao asked softly, "leaving your underwater world for this one?" Coral considered the question seriously. "I didn't leave it," she said finally. "I expanded it. My world now includes everything I had before, plus everything I've gained." The mermaid who collected broken candy from shipwrecks couldn't have imagined the confectionery paradise we're building together. Below them, the harbor glittered with both moonlight and the bioluminescent displays that Coral's relatives used to celebrate. Ships from a dozen kingdoms waited to load cargo that represented the new era of cooperation her marriage had initiated. Trade routes were being redrawn, culinary schools were developing new curricula, and children on both sides of the water's surface were growing up in a world where the impossible had become deliciously real. "The black sheep becomes the golden bridge," Coral murmured, remembering her lonely days of hiding her passion from a disapproving family. "What was that?" Cacao asked. "Just thinking about how sometimes the things that make us different are the very things that allow us to change the world," Coral replied, taking his hand as they watched the sea and sky merge in the distance. "And how the sweetest stories are the ones that bring together ingredients that no one thought could possibly work in harmony." Their kiss tasted of chocolate and sea salt, of impossible dreams made real through courage and love, and of a future filled with sweetness that neither world could have created alone. In the harbor below, mermaid and human children shared candy beneath the stars, proving that some bridges, once built with genuine affection, could never be broken. The former black sheep had indeed become the golden bridge, and the world was infinitely sweeter for her transformation.